Far Cry 6 deserves a higher difficulty option. What's going on, everyone? My name's Tenebrous Infinite, and today we're going to talk about how Far Cry 6 could have a higher difficulty, and what an enjoyable higher difficulty option could look like in the game. But before we look to the future of Far Cry 6, let's take a quick look at the past Far Cry games and what they have done to change things up difficulty-wise and how difficulty has progressed along the series. Far Cry 1 came out in the early 2000s, when hardcore PC gaming was on the rise, and it definitely aimed to appeal to those players. You had a ton of options for difficulty, starting from easy and ending in the pretty unforgiving realistic mode. 2 ditched the realistic difficulty setting for the infamous difficulty setting that many people will recognize from Far Cry 5. But, on the same hand, the general overall bar of difficulty went down quite a bit between 1 and 2. The series wasn't a linear FPS shooter anymore, and its difficulty changes definitely reflected that. Far Cry 3 and 4 stayed in the same realm of difficulty as 2, but removed some of the disadvantages your player would face in 2. So ultimately, it got a little bit easier between 2 to 3 and 4, but not by a overly huge amount like 1 to 2. 5 had the same 3 options of easy, medium, and hard, but later on with the Outpost Master update, it reintroduced the infamous difficulty from 2, bringing the bar up higher than 3 and 4 provided you played on infamous difficulty. New Dawn did away with the usual approach of difficulty, now having 2 aspects to it. The difficulty setting that you choose in the settings, just like the previous games, and the difficulty level of a given location from rank 1 to 3. It wasn't the most difficult of the series by a long shot, that still goes to number 1, but it was a unique approach to a stagnated difficulty selection setting. In Far Cry 6 we now have 2 difficulty options, Story and Action mode, alongside a similar aspect to New Dawn with regions having individual difficulties that you increase by completing the location or proceeding through the story. But there's this feeling I've got that Far Cry 6 really deserves a harder difficulty option. Something to make the world really feel like it's ruled by a tyrannical despot like what Antón Castillo is portrayed as. The thing is, I think Far Cry 6 can do a new difficulty in a way that is much more engaging than the addition of Infamous mode in Far Cry 5, tweaking certain in-game rules and enemy counts, making some gameplay features much more prominent, and even a spicy idea of mine that is unique to Far Cry 6. So first off, the most normal thing that you get with harder difficulties, health and damage. I'm gonna say it flat out, enemy health does not need to be changed much, if at all. The easy button for difficulty is to boost enemies' health, making them tougher to take down. But in Far Cry 6, there's the unique aspect of weapons ammo types, and maybe instead we could see heavier penalties for using the wrong ammo type. This would encourage a mastery type of approach to the harder difficulty, and would really hammer home that right tool for the right job motto. But on the end of damage, I could definitely see things getting bumped up. With the right outfit, Dani turns into an absolute tank. So as long as players use the right outfit for the right job, they'd have an easier time. But using the wrong outfit and you'll get like 2-shot or something. Again, promoting the mastery aspect of a harder difficulty. Now let's get to the in-game rules that would lead to a way more interesting difficulty option. One of the main ones being this.
Lower that weapon.
This behavior was added to the game for a few reasons. One, it gives you a chance to use holstering to avoid combat. And 2, it humanizes the enemies you face. From takedowns to enemies running away scared, bribing, and even passive enemy dialogue lines, there are a lot of efforts to make these enemies not seem like the enemies of past games, and humanize them and normalize them. On this supposed higher difficulty level, I think it would be great to see a shoot anyone with a weapon approach, especially to wandering AI. Of course, not at like obscene distances or anything, but in the instances where they'd say, hey, put that gun down, or get away from there. Instead, they'd just start opening fire. Now, there are narrative reasons why they don't, as Antón Castillo doesn't want to rule with an iron fist, and he's a lot more cunning of a bad guy, even though you might easily assume that he's just a typical tyrannical dictator. But still, I feel like as soldiers they can be far too forgiving, especially mid-revolution. And on a gameplay side, this would keep you much more on your toes like a guerrilla would be, attempting to maintain incognito as you head around the map instead of running around with your weapons out in the open. The other thing too is guerrilla routes. Guerrilla routes right now lead to a very easy escape from enemies, and when you head down these routes you can avoid enemy patrols pretty much entirely. But again, I think if this were a real scenario and guerrillas were having to use old routes from the last revolution, that the current military would at least have an idea of these routes. So in this hypothetical higher difficulty level, you could maybe see guards patrolling these guerrilla routes. Maybe even new enemies that are like a Spec Ops unit that's specifically designed to hunt these routes for guerrillas. Adding a whole new enemy type to the difficulty would be a really nice incentive to play on this higher difficulty. Now this next tweak is one I think maybe a lot of players have actually felt, which is, was that it when it comes to liberating a NFD outpost or mission objective, or even when going after AA guns and roadblocks? If there could be more enemy spawns in these locations, it would really spice things up. Even if it were just filled with fodder units like assaulters or vanguards, it would still have a better militaristic vibe. And here's the last, kinda maybe crazy idea. You could risk losing Bandidos recruits every time you die. Operations earn you a heck of a lot of stuff, from resources to pesos to weapons, and if you die too much, this would maybe lock access to them until you search for new recruits to save. It would be a great give and take feature. It wouldn't be game ending, but definitely would have enough weight to make the player value it. And as a gameplay feature, it would be brand new to the Far Cry series. Finally, death would mean more than just a bit of lost time or inconvenience, but not in an absolutely shitty way. And also, I mean, it kinda makes sense lore-wise. Would you follow a dude that dies every time he sets foot in a military complex? I'd probably call a priest myself and see how much an exorcism costs. But on a real note, I think this combined with unsafe guerrilla paths, more enemies, and more penalties for not using the right tool for the right job would lead to a pretty wild and challenging difficulty that not only challenges the player to use all of the in-game features, but also challenges them to plan and think smart like a guerrilla should. Unless you have a rocket launcher strapped to your back. So there are a few ways I think a new difficulty could be different from past entries in the Far Cry series. I really think that Far Cry 6 deserves something unique, and the room the two current difficulties leave is perfect for some sort of harder game mode. But before we sign off here, I want to know, do you think Far Cry 6 needs a higher difficulty? Do you have any ideas for what a hard mode could be like? Let me know your thoughts and feels in the comments down below. But for now, thank you for watching, consider subbing for more, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.